Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining us for our Hutchinson Public Library's Meet the Author event with Gabrielle Meyer. Today's event is being recorded for later viewing. A big thanks to HCVM team. Val's running around here. So thank you, Val, wherever you are. Funding for today's author event is made possible thanks to a grant through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. That's why I gave you each a little survey to fill out. That'll help me do the final grant report and gets us more funding. Now, on to our main event. We're thrilled to welcome Minnesota author Gabrielle Meyer. Gabrielle is known for her stories of love, redemption, and hope. She has written an assortment of books, including publications for Guideposts and Love Inspired. She also has her own timeless series published by Bethany House Publishers, which showcases her love of history and research. I'm really excited to announce that book number 4 comes out next week, so watch our bookshelves or go to the bookstore and buy it. Super excited. And for a full listing of Gabrielle's books, it's really impressive. You can check out her website. I was so blown away by all the books she's written. Now, please give a warm welcome to Gabrielle Meyer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, I have to apologize that this was delayed. I was just talking to Katie, and last night I was asked to give a historic tour of the Linden Hill Mansion. So if you're from, or if you know of Little Falls, they usually do Christmas at the mansions there. But they decided to start doing a Victorian Halloween event, and so they asked me to give a tour, and I had never given a tour there before, so I was just yesterday I was like, I should work on this, but I was working on that, and so then it just slipped my mind. So I'm so sorry that I was late, but I'm so happy to be here with you now. So I am from Little Falls, and I have been writing since I was 10 years old. Actually, it's kind of funny. Not really funny, but kind of funny. The only class that I ever failed was spelling, and in 4th grade. And I remember my teachers, they kind of had they suspected it in 2nd and 3rd grade that this was a problem, and so they my teacher suggested that I start to read. And I fell in love with reading at our library. And we have Carnegie Library in Little Falls, and I remember the first time I went through and I was looking at all of the different books, and I saw the Bethany House logo on the back of a book, and I remember looking at it and seeing it was from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I thought, oh, I could write for them because they're in Minnesota. And so this little girl just thought that would just be the easiest thing in the world to do. But of course I grew up and realized that getting a book published is a very difficult task, but I was very determined, so that is what I did. As Katie was saying, I do have a backlist of 40 books, so it's quite a few. I will be talking specifically about the Timeless series today, but I also have written for Love Inspired, and that is an imprint of Harlequin. And so they're clean imprint, I should say. And then I've also written for Guideposts, and I do cozy mysteries for them. Actually, you know what? I have a slide for this. I'll get back to that one. These are some of my books. So these are the ones from Love Inspired. These are Guidepost books up to here. These are novella collections through Barber. And then I also write daily guideposts for Guideposts. I need to update this picture because they're not all on there. So this is my family. My oldest daughter is in college, and my second daughter is a senior in high school, and then I have 14-year-old twin boys. So I do want to let you know that if you have any questions at any time, please stop me, because I really like this to be more of a conversation. And if you have any questions at all, I want to know what you want to know so that I can kind of tailor this for you as well. So how many of you have read any of the Timeless books? Yeah? This one? Nice. Great, so this is good. So I'd like to know that, just so that I know what I need to tell you about them. So there are currently 3 books in my Timeless series that have released, and then the 4th one comes out November 5th, Election Day, so it's lovely. And the basic premise for the first novel is it's about a woman who was born with a gift. She lives in 1774, And when she goes to sleep there, she wakes up in her other timeline, which is 1914. So she goes back and forth every day, began when she was born, and on her 21st birthday, she has to choose which life to keep and which one to forfeit. So it's a kind of a time travel with a little bit of a twist. And a lot of people ask me where I came up with that idea. And I was actually talking to my sister about the Outlander series, so if you're familiar with that. Most time travel novels are about somebody who accidentally falls through a portal of time. And then they are in that other life, they're trying to get back to their original life. Maybe they come across a war that they're trying to stop, or they fall in love, and all of a sudden they're torn between these two time periods. So when I was talking to her about that, I thought to myself, what if somebody was born with that gift? What if they had two lives that they had to choose from right away and they knew that from the beginning? And so when that idea came, it just kind of overwhelmed me with all of the possibilities of this. And so I wrote that first, or I plotted that first novel, I should say, and then all of a sudden a second idea came for a second one, and then a third came for a third one. And so I had been pursuing, at that point I had already had over 20 books published with Guideposts and Love Inspired, but I was still trying to get in with Bethany House, which was my favorite, I shouldn't say my favorite publishing house because they're all lovely, but it was my dream. And so I had already submitted 6 books to them over the course of 10 years, and they kept saying to me, we love your books, they're just not quite right for us. And so I had an agent by this point, and when I came up with the idea for this story, I really didn't think that time crossing would be accepted in the Christian market, because I write for the Christian market. So I sat on the idea for a year. I kind of talked to a couple of friends about it. They kept giving me like positive, encouragement. And so finally, I saw another author had written an actual time travel book that was picked up by a Christian publisher, actually the sister publisher to Bethany House. So I thought, well, maybe we're ready for time travel in the Christian market. So I got up really early one morning, which is not my thing, and I was sitting at the computer just typing out all my ideas. It was like 6 in the morning, and my husband walked in. He said, wow, you must really be excited about this. I said, I am. So I sent that off to my agent, and 15 minutes later she called me, and that's not typical for her to call. And she said, why have you been sitting on this idea? And so we ended up sending it to Bethany House and several other publishers, and I ended up getting multiple offers for this first book, which was the best case scenario. And Bethany House was one of them. So it's just been a dream come true. And it's been really successful, and it's kind of funny, people will say, wow, it's like you're an overnight success. I'm like, well, there was 20 books before it, so it wasn't quite an overnight success. So that was the first book, and then the second book that came out in this series is In This Moment. So this is about Libby's daughter. Libby is the first heroine. And Libby's daughter, Maggie, is born with 3 timelines, for reasons you learned in the first book. She lives in 1861, 1941, and 2001. She lives in Washington, D.C. So if you're familiar with history, 1861 was the beginning of Civil War, 1941 is the beginning of World War II, and 2001 was the terrorist attacks. So she is a medical student in 2001 in her residency program. In 1941, she is a Navy nurse. And in 1861, she is the daughter of a senator, and they're in Washington, D.C. at the beginning of the war. So much fun to write those 3 time periods. And then, of course, she has to choose by the end which one she wants and which one she's going to forfeit. And then we come to book 3. So book 3 is about identical twin sisters. So these are Maggie's daughters. And they live between 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, and 1912 in the early days of aviation and the Titanic. And so these 2 sisters go back and forth together, and they have to choose on their 25th birthday, which is a little bit different than the other ones, and there's a reason. And so they have to choose which one to keep and which to forfeit. And of course, we don't know if they're going to stay together or not. So each story has been so much fun to write, so unique, so different, because the time periods are different. The first one, she had 2 lives, second one, she had 3 lives. This third one, we have identical twin sisters. So each book I'm trying to make just a little bit unique. So the same basic premise of these time crossers, but something different. So these books were supposed to originally be a 3-book series, but with the success of them, I actually went to my publisher and I said, do you want more? And they said yes. So originally they were releasing 1 a year. Now we're doing 2 a year, and book 4, like I said, comes out not even 2 weeks. And this one, she's not a direct descendant, she is a family member, as much as I'll say about that. And she lives between 1727 during the early days, or I should say the later days of the golden age of piracy, and then 1927 during Prohibition and the gangster era. And in 1927, if you're familiar with Charles Lindbergh history, I worked at the Lindbergh site for 10 years, so I have a lot of Lindbergh history. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic Ocean. He was the first person to fly solo across the ocean, and so he became world famous. And he makes a couple of cameo appearances in the 1927 timeline because Caroline lives in Minneapolis. So it was a lot of fun to finally set a story in Minnesota. And when I sent this off to my editor, who was in St. Paul, she said, this feels like an ode to Minnesota story. Because I've got Como Park in there, we've got the state park, or the state fair is in there. So if you're from Minnesota, I think that you will probably recognize quite a few of the places and the events that take place. So book 5 then will release, and I don't have any slides for it, book 5 will release in May of next year, and that's my Jack the Ripper story. So in that story, she lives, it's one woman, and she lives between 1938 and 1888, so she only has 50 years between her time periods. That's kind of the uniqueness of hers. And in 1938, she is invited, she works for the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and she's invited to the London Museum. And she's there to put together an exhibit about Jack the Ripper. And she finds out that her younger sister, who has been missing for almost a year, will become the last victim of Jack the Ripper. So she has to try to figure out who he is in time to save her sister, and figure out where her sister is, and why she left. So there are currently 7 books planned for this series. And on Tuesday, I'm actually going down to the offices at Bethany House, and we're going to have a little powwow and discuss where we want to go from here. So I think that one of the things, it's very unique right now, I've been told, that a series would go beyond 3 books, just because usually people kind of lose interest towards the end of a series. But this one, I think, is different enough because while it's connected, each story is so vastly different that that's kind of the appeal of it. So we're very happy about that. Everybody is. So do you have any questions? I've just thrown a lot of information at you.
So you're actually working on more than one book at a time?
Yes.
Right? How do you keep that straight?
It is very, yes. So the question is, am I working on more than one book at a time? So yes, currently right now, on Thursday, I finished writing the first draft of book 6. And I haven't even told you about that one, and I won't. But then I should be getting, this week, I should be getting the 3rd round of edits for book 5, which is the Jack the Ripper story. Book 4 is releasing in less than 2 weeks. I am doing research for book 7. I'll start writing that in February. And just the other day I was doing a book club meeting. I do Zoom with book clubs, and I was talking to them about book 1. So it's, yes, there's a lot. I think it's, in my mind, it's easy to compartmentalize each book and each, because I am with it for so long that these people in these books, my husband was just telling some people yesterday that when I'm creating characters and writing these books, he said it's almost like a whole new cast of people moves in with us, because I will just talk about Caroline, just randomly, oh, Caroline this and that, whatever. And he's like, it's so weird, because he said they seem so real to him too. And I have, like I said, 4 children, and my girls too. I talk to them a lot about it, and they'll say the same thing. So part of what I do, here, I'll actually show you. I'll show you this is always up on my computer. So this is my daily, each one of those represents a day. And so you can kind of see, I have to plan out, I'm already planning out for 2026. That's how far out I go for writing, because I already know when different books are due, and I know when I'll get the edits for them. And I've done this long enough to know about how much time I need for each stage. So I will put in there, my daughter's wisdom teeth removal. I took the whole day off for that. I will put in there, you know, if I know I need about 2 weeks to do 1 round of edits, I'll give myself about 2.5 weeks so that I have a little buffer if something should come up. And then I, of course, take off time for vacations and all of that too. Whoops. So it is my full-time job. I do it Monday through Friday. And depending on how much time I spend on Instagram or Facebook, it usually only takes me about 3 hours to get my chapter written for the day. Excuse me. So what I usually try to do is, I usually give myself about 6 months to research a book. And I will do that, usually how I start is I look up audiobooks. And I was just telling Katie, we were talking about getting a speeding ticket. I have only got 1 speeding ticket in my life, and I was listening to a book called A Storm of Witchcraft, and it was research for this book right here, and it was so fascinating. I was driving to St. Cloud, and all of a sudden I see the lights, and oh my gosh, and I look down, I'm like, I'm going 80 miles an hour, and the cop, he pulls me over, and he says, do you know you're speeding? I'm like, yes, and he's like, why are you in a hurry? And I said, I'm listening to an audiobook about the Salem witch trials. And he just looked at me like I was nuts. So I was like, all right, I accept it. So I'm very good about putting my cruise control on now. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. That's how I start my research. And that, it's kind of a twofold benefit, because I'm listening to it. I also homeschool my children, so they get the benefit of hearing this historical, these books. So about 6 months I do that kind of research, and then towards the last month, right before I start writing, that's where I'll deep dive into more details about what I'm looking for. And I usually have like a spark of an idea in my head for the book. So as I'm listening to the audiobooks and as I start to deep dive into research, I'm looking for specific things that I know that I'll need to put into my books. I like to include as many real historical characters as possible. So every one of these books you're going to see people that you'll know from history. And then every once in a while, I'll be able to put in people that are a little bit lesser known, but were impactful for the events that are in these books. And then if there's a character who I really like, but I kind of need them to be a little bit more of a main character. So for instance, in this moment in her 1861 timeline, she is the daughter of a senator. And I wanted her to be as close as possible to Abraham Lincoln for that particular story. So Abraham Lincoln had a friend who was a senator, his name was Edward Baker. And I really liked his storyline. I liked what he was doing during the Civil War, so I just used him and changed his name. So he inspired that character. So I will go through, I'll do that, and then I usually give myself about a week to actually plot my stories. Some of my author friends are what they call pantsers, and they will just sit down with an idea and they will just start writing with no plan. That terrifies me. I cannot imagine, but it works for them. Usually for people who are pantsers, they will write the whole story, then they'll have to tear it apart and try to figure out. I have one friend who literally deletes half of the story and then fills it, and that's terrifying. I just don't want to think about that. So I will sit down and I have, let me see if I can pull this up. I don't want to give you guys too much information because you'll see my, but I do have a spreadsheet that I use. So I will show you for the first book because, where is it though? Look at all that, that's all. So this is, I'll just give you a general idea here. Oh good, it doesn't have anything in it. Okay, so this is what my spreadsheet will look like when I first start to write. I do a 3-act story, and I usually do about 30 chapters. And so, those are just notes down there, what I need to add. So what I will do is I will go through, I know this looks a little daunting, but this is how my brain works, I'm very linear. I will go through and I will just what is my first scene, second scene, they meet or whatever happens. And then I go through and I fill in all of the blanks. And usually I have highlights that I know are already going to happen about where I need to put them in the story. And then it's kind of like connecting the dots from there. How do I get them from here to here? So that's kind of how I plot. And I take about a week to do that. And then I actually sit down, and when I'm ready to start writing my story, I usually do about a chapter a day. And like I said, that's usually about 3 hours of actual writing time. If I need to stop and do more research, it usually happens. Like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, she needs to work at a hospital during the Civil War. Where were the hospitals? What were they named? Where should I put her? And so then that usually is what takes me the most time is trying to find those details. Very rarely I will come across something that I absolutely cannot find the answer to, and then I think to myself, well, if I don't know the answer, if I can't find it, nobody else is going to know the answer, so I'll have to make something up. And that's what the author note is at the back of the book. I do a very detailed author note just to let people know what isn't historically accurate, because although I write fiction, my heart is a historian, kind of a history nerd, and I love to share real history. And so I always make sure at the back of the book to say these are the things that I changed for the story's sake. That also helps me in editing because my editors go through and they fact check every single detail. To the point that in the second book, in this moment, Maggie finds out about a battle that took place, the Battle of Ball's Bluff. And she finds out, and it's during the day, she's working at this hospital that I found. And my editor came back and she said, actually, the reports from that particular battle did not reach Washington, D.C. until almost 9 o'clock at night. What? So she's like, so you're gonna need to change the time of the day that she finds us out. Well, that was easy enough to do, but that's how detailed they are. And so when I send in my author letter with the first draft of the manuscript, my editors can look at that and see, oh, yep, I have somebody getting arrested. It was a real person who got arrested in like August, but I had to switch it to September for the sake of the book. But she could see that I then shared that in the author note. So I'll go through, I will plot out that story, then I will sit down and start writing it, and it will take me 30 writing days to write a full novel. If I'm really excited and it's really flowing, I might write 2 chapters a day. I did that this week because I was asked to give tours yesterday at Linden Hill, and I knew that I would need to spend the entire day memorizing that tour. And so I ended up writing close to 8,000 words on Wednesday so that I could take Friday off. So I can't always do that, but I had time to do it that day. So yeah, it takes about 30 writing days to get that done. I usually give myself like 6 weeks to write the first draft. Then I will go into my publishing house, and usually 2 editors will look at it, then they'll discuss it, and then I get a memo from them, and it's usually 3 to 5 pages, and they'll go through, character development, or, we want to see this strengthened, or we, whatever the case may be. It's always different with each story. And then I usually get about 2 months to fix it, but I usually only take about 4 weeks, and then it goes through 2 more rounds of edits before you guys see it. So it's kind of amazing because these books are not only looked at by me several times through this period, they're looked at by several editors, and then after I look at it the final time, it goes to a proofreader. So whenever I get one of these books, and somebody, because I usually don't read them after they're at this stage, but somebody will, email me and say, well, there's a missing period, or how is that possible? It's very frustrating at that stage. Not that somebody let me know, but that we missed it. It's like, how did that happen? So, but then I have to remind myself that there are usually 106,000 words in each of these books, and if there's only one missing period, that's a pretty good, But, so there's always, I'm always in the middle of researching for a book, writing a book, editing a book, launching a book. So it is, I'm able to compartmentalize pretty easily, and I don't know, I guess it's just how my brain works. Are there any other questions?
Do you have a favorite of the ones that you've written so far of the series?
When people ask me if I have a favorite, it's kind of like asking me if I have a favorite child. And I like each of my children for different reasons. I love them all. So each one is different. So, of course, the first one is always going to hold a special place in my heart because it was the book that got me published in the publishing house I wanted, and I just loved the idea, and it was just so easy to write. Before that one released, because that's the other thing too, is the book is due to my editor. The first round is due a year before it will actually release. So we have a year to do all of the editing and work on the covers. So before When the Day Comes released in May of 2022, I wrote the second book in the series, and this is the one with the 3 timelines. And this was the most fun to write because, she falls in love in every single timeline, so there's 3 very handsome heroes, so that was fun. But I had not yet released the first one yet, so the second one was still, there was no critiques in my head yet. But then the first book released, and for the most part, it's lovely reviews, it's wonderful. But it became an Amazon daily deal on Audible, which is a really cool thing. Like that's something we can't influence at all, so Amazon chose to do that. And the book is written primarily for the Christian market. It's not preachy or anything, but it has very strong Christian themes. And it went to an audience of people that perhaps don't read Christian novels. And the reviews that they left for the book, one of them left me in tears. And I know, so I learned my lesson, stop reading the reviews. But I actually left my house, my husband was working, and I had to go to my husband because I was so upset and told him, and I read it. And I'm not even gonna repeat the things that people have said. Like, they're really icky. We actually had to report one of them because it was pretty much hate speech. So that got in my head. And so then when I wrote book 3, I just kind of felt paralyzed. And I had already written, at this point, I'd written like 30 books because I was also writing for Love Inspired and Guideposts at the same time. And I'd never once ever been insecure about my books because I've always looked at it that these are the stories that I've been given to tell, and I will tell them the best way that I can. And they're, whether people like them or not, that's their choice. But for the first time, I got insecure, and it was really hard to write the 3rd book for the series because of that. So I wrote it, and one of the things that I love about the 3rd book, and that's actually what this slide is up here for, because it's set in Salem during the witch trials, is these are identical twin sisters, Hope and Grace, but they're actually inspired by my daughters, Ellis and Marin, who are not twins. The boys are twins. And I wanted, because it's in first person, I wanted 2 very distinct voices, and my girls are as different as night and day. And one of them is Hope, and one is Grace in the story. And I would sit down with my girls, and I would ask them questions. So, if you were a time crosser, and your sister did this, how would you react? And it was cute. They were having debates in my kitchen about how they would, handle it. I'm just taking notes. And So because of that, my oldest daughter read it, and she actually just read the first half. She had never done that for me before. And she said to me, "Mom, I think this is my favorite." And I thought, well, that's because you're in it. And then she's like, "Hurry up and finish it." So I finished it, and then she reread the whole thing again. She's like, "Yes, this is my favorite." And the entire time I was having self-doubts about it, and she kept telling me, "I love it, I love it." And so finally, when it released, I was very nervous. And that was just, I've gotten so many more positive comments about that book than any of the other ones. So that was really cool for me, and it helped me as I launched into book 4. I was like, you know what? It doesn't really matter what I perceive about these stories. The readers are going to take them and do what they need, or what is meant, for them. And so anyway, so to answer your question, they're all my favorite for different reasons. Everyone is just so unique, and I love adding the little historical tidbits in them that I find interesting. That's another question I get, is how do I choose the time periods? And I choose the time periods that I want to write about. So, and especially with the 1861, 1941, and 2001, I've always been fascinated that those 3 events happen with a 1 a year. And I remember on September 11th, 2001, I strongly remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is a year that ends in a 1. And I'm not a numbers person, but I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to go into another war. And we did, kind of. I mean, we did, but anyway, so this particular next section, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the research that I do. Let's check the time. All right. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know.
How does this book, we have a small theater company in New Dance. We just did The Crucible.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering how you reconcile, because there were some pretty creepy religious figures in it.
Yeah.
And so with your Christian writing,
Yep.
how do you reconcile some of that in your book?
Yeah.
In this book?
So, first of all, with the Salem witch trials, I'm actually descended from both sides. So I'm descended from the Putnams, and the Putnams were the icky ones in the Crucible because they were the icky ones in the whole thing. And I'm also descended from the Proctors. So John Proctor and his wife Elizabeth were part of the Crucible. I'm descended from John's sister, Mary. So most of my life I've known this, and so I've been very keen to know the real history of Salem, and I've been there several times to visit. And one of the things that I don't want to do in my stories is I don't want to take my own personal opinions about what happened and try to push them off on anybody. That's not what the intent is. My intent is to give the historical events and try to imagine what it would have been like to live through them without judging the event as it happens. So that's kind of how I handle, any of these things. I deal with a lot of really difficult history in all of these books, and it's more, like I said, about trying to figure out if I lived through it, how would I have been impacted? So, and the Crucible is also partly fictitious. Some of the things that happened were imagined. And so, so there were 2 different places that this kind of happened. So Salem, which is the town itself now, was called Salem Town. Salem Village was 4 miles away, and that was actually, now it's called Danvers. At the time it was called Salem Village. The majority of what happened at Reverend Parris's house, so this is the foundation of the minister's house where it all began, is still there. And so I walked down into it, and my husband and my daughters were with, and they were like, we're not going in there. I was like, it's just rocks. And then just down the road is this building, and this was the ordinary, or the tavern, and this is where they would hold the accused, and they held some of the original trials here. But then when they actually went to the grand jury, that was in Salem, and then when they were hung, it was in Salem. So the actual story itself is set in Danvers or Salem Village, and there was over, let's see, I can't remember so these are some of the pictures. One of the misconceptions, and this is the other thing that I set out to do when I write these books, is try to clear up some misconceptions. So there were over 200 people who were accused of witchcraft during this time. 19 of them were hung, one was pressed to death because he refused to plead. And they could not try him unless he pled guilty or not guilty. And so to try to get him to give a plea, his name was Giles Corey, they put rocks on him until he was pressed to death. His wife, Martha, had already been hung. So this is George Burroughs. He was a minister that was hung. Most of the people who were accused by teenage girls, and most of them had some kind of beef with the Putnam family. So George Burroughs actually owed the Putnam family money, and he had skipped town and was in Maine. One of the ladies, Sarah Osborne, she had been married to a relative of the Putnams, and her husband died, and she had 2 sons, and she then married her indentured servant, and she was in a dispute with the Putnams over land that her sons had inherited, but that they wanted. So most of the people that were accused, you could track them back to the Putnams, which was horrible. That's not how it started, but that's kind of where it ended up. So it was almost like it started through fear and kind of some PTSD. There had been, most of the girls who were part of the accusers had been in Maine during some Indian massacres, and they had been orphaned and were brought into Salem and were working in the homes of these people. So these girls were traumatized. And the very first one that was showing any signs of affliction was actually the Reverend's daughter and his niece. And there's a book, the one that I said, I can't remember now, the Witchcraft, the Storm of Witchcraft, that actually suggests that this was a psychological disorder that these girls had, and that fear spread. And then the Putnams used it for fraud. So it's complicated, and I don't think we're ever going to have, I don't know where this picture is. I don't think we're ever going to have all of the answers. So over 200 men, women, and children were accused, 19 men and women executed, 1 pressed to death, 5 died in jail. The youngest was 4 years old. Yeah, so Sarah Good, she was one of the first accused, and her 4-year-old daughter, Dorcas or Dorothy, she has 2 different names in history, she was put in jail. She was in jail for over 9 months. I can't even imagine. There's no history or record of what happened to her. So, but interestingly enough, if you were put on the stand and you said, "I'm not guilty of this," those were the people who were hung. The ones who said that they were guilty just stayed in jail until it was all over. I don't know where all my pictures are. I'm so sorry. I know that they're here. They're just hiding from us. This should be this one. I don't know. I'm sorry. So the other half of my, you can see it's here in the picture. The other half of the story is set in 1912, and I focus on aviation in that one. And so I don't know how to get that. I'm sorry. What if I do this? No? Okay, well, we'll just keep going. So early aviation statistics are really staggering too. So it's so much fun to take 2 different historical timelines that seem like they have absolutely nothing in common, and this particular book doesn't. Some of the other ones have common themes throughout them. But part of the reason I chose 1912 aviation is because it was a really fun time in history. And I knew that the Salem part of the story was going to be a little bit harder and darker. And so I wanted something that was brighter as a nice little palate cleanser. Because my stories are set up every chapter. So the first chapter would be 1692. Then the next chapter is 1912, and then 1692 and 1912. So, and this particular story is told, the 1692 part of the story is told by Grace, and the 1912 story is told by Hope. And Hope is my aviator. So some of the statistics, first flight was December 1903. The first pilot's license was June of 1912. Harriet Quimby was the first woman to earn her pilot's license in August of 1912. And then between 1909 and 1912, one pilot died every 10 days. And that's staggering. It is the highest mortality rate of any human endeavor besides war. And I'm sorry, you can't see Harriet's picture, but Harriet is on the little slide. So she inspired my character because she just was such a fascinating woman herself. And I don't think it's going to show you any pictures.
She must have died in a crash, huh?
She did, yep. So she died. So she actually was the first woman to fly over the English Channel. And then that was in April of 1912, actually the day before the Titanic went down. And so at this time, early aviators were world famous, like overnight. So the first man, his last name is Blériot, he was the first man to fly over the English Channel, and he was very, very famous for it. So Harriet, she wanted to make as much money as she could at flying. She was taking care of her parents. So she got this idea. She was from America, but she got this idea to be the first woman to fly over the English Channel. And she did, and the next morning she woke up thinking that the newspapers would be full of her name, but she literally woke up the next morning and it was all about the Titanic. So she was disappointed on many different levels, but she had, yeah. So she, I'm so sorry, I don't know why this, okay, so you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna get out of this quickly and see if I can get back in and if it will pull out my pictures for me. So yes, Harriet, she was a fascinating woman. She was also on Broadway, and she wrote for a magazine, and she just led a very fascinating life, and then she died very early, which is sad. Oh yeah, that worked. Okay. She was also a very attractive woman, which made her popular too. These are some more pictures of her. So when I talk about early aviation, these are what the airplanes looked like. There was nothing. The reason why Harriet died is because they were not even strapped in. And she had just gotten a brand new airplane and it had a double-seater, and she was not familiar driving or flying with a passenger. And she was about 1,000 feet over at this fair that they were at, and they said that all of a sudden the airplane just like flipped up, and the man, this is horrible, he flew out. And then she righted the airplane again, and seconds later it did it again, and then she flew out. And so neither one survived that. So a lot of the crashes that happened were just mind-boggling. So this is Lincoln Beachy. He was the most famous pilot at the time. They said, I'm trying to remember, yeah, they said hundreds of thousands knew him by name in the world, or by sight, and the world knew him by name. So he perfected the death dive. So I have a male aviator in my story who is inspired by Lincoln Beachy. This is one of those times when I take real people and their lives are just so amazing. And I just take bits and pieces of it. But my character does a death dive. So they would go 3,000 feet up, and then they would turn the plane down and cut the engine, these little planes, and then they would dive down, and right before they got to the earth, they would turn on the engine again and swoop up. Dozens of people died trying to do this, but for whatever reason, Lincoln Beachy knew what he was doing. But he died on May 14th, 1915, because he was out in San Francisco over the bay, and their best guess is that a seagull flew into his motor because he just crashed, and he died because he drowned, because he could not get out of the airplane. So, just amazing to me that they knew this. All of these people, they had friends that were dying all the time, and they still did this. So his airplane looked a little bit different than Harriet's, but they're basically flying at the same time. So, yes, every hour until then is the next book coming out. This is not the cover for it. I don't have the cover on here, but I do have the cover. And that one, like I said, is my Jack the Ripper story. Excited about that one. So,
You don't have to read them in order or have read one before. You can pick it up in the middle and read it.
sure. So the question is, do you have to read them in order? Each story stands alone as its own story, beginning to end, and all of your questions are answered. However, so there are a lot of twists and turns and surprises. So if you would read book 2 in the series before you picked up book 1, like I said, she has 3 timelines, and the reason she has 3 timelines is because of something that happens in book 1. So if you would pick up book 2 to start reading it, it would spoil all of the big surprises in book 1. So it's best read in order. And then the other thing too is I put a lot of what we call Easter eggs in the book. So like if you're reading book 3, all of a sudden you're going to see somebody pop up that was in book 1 or book 2 that kind of comes out of nowhere and surprises you. But if you haven't read the first 2 books, that person probably wouldn't have the same impact. So they're best read in order, but they can be read out of order. People do it all the time. Any other questions?
Where do you get the reference images for your characters?
Oh, I make them with AI. So I use Midjourney through Discord, and it's this really cool AI. So I just type in there what I want. Like for instance, for book 2, Maggie here, you can probably tell she's inspired by Rachel McAdams. And so I put into this Rachel McAdams dressed in clothing from 1861, a headshot, whatever. I would give the information, and then it pops up 4 images. And then if I like one of them, but it's not quite right, then I'll hit this button, and it gives you variations of that. And so then I'll do it again for 1941 and 2001. It's a time sucker, but I enjoy it immensely. Because it's kind of, when I'm using my creative brain to write these stories, it's so intense. Sometimes it's just, it like sucks the life out of me, it feels like, in a good way. It sounds very dramatic. But so when I can do things like create the images for my characters, it's creative, but it's not the same intense creativity. So I enjoy doing that. Any other questions? So I did bring books today to sell if anybody is interested. I'm just going to do $15 for each book. They retail for, this is $16.99 up to $18.99, so I'll just do $15. And this one, I literally got my copies yesterday, so I'm so excited. You guys are the first ones to see this. So, yeah. No other questions? Then thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure, and thank you for waiting for me.